welcome to a new episode of the Mint Build Business series. Our conversations with business leaders and CEOs from across industries and across the world. Today, I'm delighted to have two very distinguished guests with me, all the way from London, England, which by the way is my favorite city in the world, Tiger Tyagarajan, CEO at Genpact, and from not so far away, Puneet Chandok of AWS, right here in New Delhi, where I currently am broadcasting from. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. I want to just quickly introduce Tiger for the benefit of our viewers. Genpact today listed, of course, on the NYSE, one of the pioneers in what was then known as the BPO industry. And now, of course, it's a full service professional services firm offering BPM solutions, consulting services, transformation services, and whatnot. 100,000 plus people, $3.7 billion in revenue. And I think equally importantly, the company which has set the tone and set the trends in its chosen industries. Tiger is now in his 10th year as the CEO of the company and has spent more than 25 years in this company and its predecessor forms when it was still a division at General Electric. During this time, of course, he's not only run this company, but also run the financial services businesses at GE, played roles which are global operating roles at GE. And before he became CEO of the company, was the Chief Operations Officer under Puneet Chandok, who was then the CEO of the company. Tiger Tyagarajan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jaideep. Thank you. Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Wonderful. Puneet, of course, is my guest as well today, the president for Amazon Web Services India and South Asia. Before he took this role, he was at McKinsey & Company, the consulting firm, for several years, where he was last a partner. And before that, he spent time in the tech industry in various roles at IBM. Since I've already introduced him once before in an earlier episode, I won't take longer. But Puneet, it's a real pleasure to have you back as well.
I'm thrilled to be here, Jaideep, and Genpact is a special relationship. I've been following Tiger for many, many years. It's truly a privilege to be on the panel with him today.
Same here.
We're both fanboys here. So let me get going with a data point from actually one of the companies of which I am an alumnus, right? So I came across some very interesting data points from IDC, and IDC says that they did a study, and in 2020, the worldwide GDP, and I'm just going to read this out so that I get the numbers right. The worldwide GDP was $85 billion, and they say of this, 23 billion was driven by IT. Now that's interesting in itself because they're saying more than a quarter was IT driven. But the really interesting thing is they project by 2023, so just in a period of 3 to 4 years, the $102 trillion global GDP will see 53 trillion as being IT driven. Tiger, let me start with you first. You're quite literally in the center of the world in London. In the context of the Western world, seen by many quite rightly at the vanguard of the digital revolution. How do these numbers resonate with you, and how are they playing out for Genpact?
Again, Jaideep, thank you for having me on this conversation, and Puneet, great to reconnect back with you. It resonates intensely, Jaideep, and I didn't know the numbers, but it's completely resonates. And there are three reactions I have. One, it's fair to say that the cliche that people use, which basically goes as every business is now a technology business, is probably true. I think the world was getting there. The pandemic just accelerated it. The second is that we've heard this term, data is the new oil, often. And what I think is interesting to understand is that data by itself is pretty meaningless, is pretty worthless. The ability to pull data together and then use it almost real time in a predictive manner is where value gets created. And you can't do that without technology. And the third is, and I know we're going to probably touch on this because all of us experience this every day, which is there is a distinction for many years between the world of using technology in our personal lives and using technology in a business environment. I think it'll be fair to say that that has been converging, but the joy of using technology at home is actually so much better than the joy of working with business technologies. And the reality is that the world is changing there as well. Experience for users and customers is becoming the way you win markets and the way you keep your customer. And that again is driven by technology. So you almost have to wake up in the morning and say, life is about technology. Now, when you read out those GDP numbers, I think it'll be dangerous to assume that therefore technology firms are the only firms that will make up the economy. No, what that term basically means is every firm is going to become a technology firm and is going to become intense in technology, which obviously means, great business for Puneet and his gang.
So it means great business for Genpact as well, because they'll need help both from a process and model transformation perspective, as well as on the digital infrastructure perspective. And of course, both of you folks are traveling that journey, dare I say, with some skill and ease. But what you've also done, Tiger, in the last 10 years, right? And as someone who's been looking at the company from afar, is while you've been building these competencies, you've also been equipping Genpact and arming Genpact with bolt-on acquisitions of increasing ambition, if I look at it from a deal size perspective, right? And Inquero was the latest one, but before that, there's been a whole bunch of very interesting ones. And so tell us a little bit about, when you think about Genpact 5-10 years down from today, I'm sure inorganic growth will continue to be part of the strategy, but let's peel that layer back. And how does that play out? And then Puneet, I'd love to just get you thinking about, how AWS is helping organizations such as Genpact, when they're making these acquisitions with the integration process and with accelerating the go-to-market there. But Tiger, first over to you.
No, actually, it's a great question, Jaideep. And the way we think about M&A is not as a growth vector, but actually as a strategy vector. And I'm sure Puneet, with your background, this will resonate with you. So we start with strategically, where do we want to take the business? Where do we think the market's going? What is the total addressable market that we think we have a right to play and win in? And what are the choices we are making? So it's really about choices. Particularly, when you take Genpact at, getting close to $4 billion in revenue, competing with people who are 10 times our size, we got to make choices. If you don't make choices, then we'll be competing with everyone a little bit. Versus if you make choices, you'll be competing as number one, number two in the markets we choose, and in the services we choose, and in the technologies we choose. Once you make those choices at a strategy level, then you say, how are you going to build capabilities? Are you going to build it yourself? Or are you going to partner? Or are you going to acquire? And really, there are three parts to the answer. And depending on the situation, in many cases you build and you scale. In some cases you partner, and in even fewer cases, I'm just giving numbers here, you actually acquire, because acquisition is the most expensive way to bring in capabilities.
And the riskiest.
And that's why our M&A function and our M&A leader works really closely with our head of strategy and is part of the strategy team, and works closely with me and my business leaders to identify opportunity. And that's how we, orchestrated our acquisition of the company that builds experience in customer digital journeys, or implements a cloud-based workflow on a low-code, no-code basis that is so integral to all the work we do. Or the most recent one you just described, which is Untitled, which is all about leveraging data for analytics in the cloud, actually using a number of platforms such as AWS in order to build those data-driven models on the cloud that anyone from anywhere can access to actually take decisions on the spot. So first, therefore, acquisitions is actually a way you scale capabilities at speed in order to address the market and the clients are addressing.
And revenue comes as a byproduct almost. So Puneet, let me turn to you. Tiger's given me a great segue here. So, he talks about partnering and buying as, 2 out of the 3 options. And I know that you folks partner with a number of companies, and especially, in the early stage startup ecosystem, where they're not only your customers, but also many times you're strategically partnering with them. But now you're doing the same more and more with larger organizations as well. So do help, give us a little bit of the AWS story from this perspective. It'll be interesting to know.
First of all, Jaideep, I loved what Tiger said, right? Which is strategies about choices, right? And the way you said it, Tiger, which is the first choice is where to play, which is what areas make most sense for you. And then the how to win comes. And that could be building, buying, incubating, acquisitions, building on platforms. And by the way, the number of options and the how to win options or the how to win universe is expanding as we speak, right? There are so many ways to get to the market. So I think that was a really interesting point you made, Tiger. I think a couple of things, Jaideep, I'll say. I think one, you touched on the word platforms. And platforms are really becoming very interesting today because, and platform is not a piece of technology, it's a business model, right? It's fascinating today because platforms have the ability to create demand while externalizing the means of production, right? So they don't have kitchens or homes or drivers. We're all talking about the Zomato IPO. I'm sure, Tiger, you heard about this there. But they're creating incredible amount of demand. They're not cooking food. But I think that is another interesting, fascinating kind of innovation that's happening, which is, and by the way, you don't have to, and these platforms bring a ton of options to you, right? In terms of how you build on them, how you build with them. So lots of interesting things happening. I think the other point is a lot of these platforms and businesses are building on the cloud for three reasons. One is just the scale, right? And agility that cloud and technology brings to you. Second is moving from CapEx to what we call elastic OpEx. And third is innovation and speed to market, right? And that to me is a real competitive advantage today. I'll give you an example. Practo, which is a really interesting healthcare platform in India, and you'll be amazed at the statistic. During the pandemic, they've scaled 60 times. And by the way, they were doing a lot of product innovation, bringing new features to their customers every month. Now they're bringing it in a few days. Now, you can't do that on-prem. You can't do that with the old tools. You can't do that with data centers and the old ways of doing things, right? And that's where I think there's a clear realization that technology and cloud react well to uncertainty. And in this new world, if you can really learn to play with technology and learn to work with technology, and to Tiger's point, figure out a way to partner, build, buy, whatever is the right answer based on your choices, then there is a real market to be unlocked and a real opportunity to go after.
No, absolutely, sir. And one of the things around, you talked about volatility and you talked about uncertainty. And one of the other dimensions of this was how, I guess, both your organizations as ours had to literally spin on a dime and get used to a work from home environment, or now what we're calling a work from anywhere environment, hybrid work. What I mean, the labels will keep evolving, I think, as Tiger said earlier, right? But when you're a 100 company startup or even a 1,000 person company, it's one scale of a challenge. But Tiger, when you got 100,000 people, and Puneet, Amazon is, and I call Amazon as a group, not just AWS, probably even bigger than that from a headcount perspective. How does a company like that make this happen? And I want to get you guys to touch upon two dimensions of it, right? So one is, of course, the technology and the agility that is required for that, but also from a leadership and culture perspective, right? And I guess, Tiger, from there's a third part as well, which is your customers. I know you work with a number of banks who would have freaked out at the thought of the security issues and compliances and all of those things. So please do shed some light on that, and then Puneet, I'll come back to you as well.
Again, Jaideep, great question. So I'm actually going to start at the culture and leadership and people end of the spectrum, and then I'll touch a little bit on the technology end, and I'm sure Puneet, you can add a lot more insights into that. We obviously didn't know almost anything about this topic until the day we decided to switch to work from home. And the fascinating thing in that journey was that we moved to work from home in China 5 days before we moved to work from home across the globe. That's it. So we were one of the first organizations to flip the switch and say everyone goes home. And I would say big driver of that was we watched our clients. And if you take 500 clients and you watch some of them who you always value for being, looking around the corner better than the others. And we saw a few organizations that we respected a lot who at the leadership level, having worked with 150 markets that they work with across the globe, took the decision that we're going to flip everything to home in a consumer goods world. And I remember the next day morning, we got together as a team and said, if that company can do this, then they're seeing something that we will see 5 days from now. So let's not wait. Boom. Now, when we did that, we did not know exactly how everything is going to work. And that goes back to what I would classify under the broad terminology of agility, flexibility, learnability, ability to deal with ambiguity, and all of that. And all of that is things that we've tried to build in our culture for 20, 25 years. And one of our board members said, when I explained to them about a month later where we've landed and how things have worked, and I said, and they said, look, what you've done for 20 years got tested. So I'm not surprised that actually you managed to do this, because that's what you've been doing for 20 years. So I think this notion of agility and flexibility is incredibly important, has always been important, but the pandemic just demonstrated that. The other thing that was clear is what is culture? Culture is when people take decisions on the ground without anyone telling them what decisions to take, without there being a rule book. It's kind of what happened at the Taj when the attack happened in Bombay. So it's similar. And therefore, employees on the ground across 120 delivery centers, 25 countries, took decisions on the ground that in retrospect, was the right decision. We basically said there are only 2 design principles. We will protect the health and safety and everything of our employees, and we will find a way to continue to deliver services that we thought were very critical for our clients. And the conclusion we came to was that a number of our services we realized was incredibly important to keep the world running. A credit card transaction doesn't go through, people can't buy milk. When a retailer orders cheese from a supplier, a consumer goods cheese manufacturer, and if the order doesn't go through, the cheese doesn't get delivered. When someone who's applying for $20,000 from the government for their package, when that package doesn't go through, they don't have the money to pay their furloughed employees. So we realized everything we do is incredibly important for our clients and the economy. So we said we got to find a way to protect that. And our clients were all going through the same thing. And therefore, there was a little bit of, we know what you're going through because we are going through the same thing. So there was a shared empathy, which is a big benefit. And then, of course, we set up groups to share learnings almost every day. We were doing learning calls every day. And then the last thing I'll say is we all assumed that the technology hopefully works. And some of us were of the opinion, and that included me and a bunch of people in the company, saying the technology has always been available. Now it's going to get tested. Some people in our clients, and these are global 100 clients, actually have never used these technologies before. So for them, it was, wow, this technology exists.
Very cool. Let me just pick that up, because one of the things that the Global 100 has been shy of using, especially in the mission critical workloads, has been the kind of platforms and technologies that AWS was offering. Of course, that's been changing rapidly, especially in recent times. But Puneet, the Amazon experience itself, right? You heard what Tiger had to say, and I'm sure you folks went through a similar pivot almost overnight. Share a little bit about that, and then I'm afraid we'll have to very quickly close. We're flat out of time. So over to you.
I want to build on one of the stories that Tiger was talking about, the customers, right? One of our customers, one customer told me that for the first time, we've started to behave like the organization we always wanted to be. And that to me was just a beautiful statement of, and he said, and by the way, he kind of completed that by saying, I hope we don't snap back and don't go back to the old ways of working. And I think that's something we all should be conscious and intentional about. But I think back to your point, there are 2 things, Jaideep. One is we all realize that remote or hybrid is the way to work, and we're not going to go back to our old ways of doing it. But the other interesting unlock that's happening because of remote working is we're entering what we call the era of a virtual business, right? So you can literally now build a business from anywhere in the world. I mean, Tiger, Genpact pioneered this for services, but now even on the product side, if you look at the B2B SaaS ecosystem in India, companies like Freshworks, Clevertap, Dhruva, InMobi, I could go on. There is so much interesting B2B SaaS innovation happening because people can hire virtually, collaborate virtually, sell virtually, deliver virtually. It is just, I think there's an amazing amount of innovation that's happening. And there are 2 things that Jaideep, you spoke about. One is technology and second is culture. The interesting part is, and Tiger said it better than I could, both are about leadership. I mean, technology, the biggest challenge with technology is not technology, right? I mean, for example, at AWS, we can build any application and run this on the cloud today. It's not about technology, it's about leadership. It's about the fear of unknown. It's about the ability to take chances as a leader, lead from the front. And that eventually goes back to culture. So at Amazon, what we say is day one culture, which is we always want to behave like a day one company, which means 2 or 3 things. One is customer obsession. So customers at the heart of everything we do. And that has become a little tricky remotely, but we're still trying to engage as much as we can with customers. You can't be in the room, but at least you can talk to as many customers as you'd like to. Second is high-speed decision-making. And that, I think, is picked up pace in this remote environment. So in fact, we're taking more decisions and faster decisions than we ever could in the physical environment, right? And that's moving really fast. And then third is doing a lot of experiments and innovation. And that, again, is I'm just seeing a lot more of that than I was seeing a year before when we were in physical rooms together.
And let me, again, just pick up from there. I suppose this is like a little bit of a daisy chain conversation. We kind of spun on a dime, shared empathy with customers. Tiger, you mentioned. Puneet, you talked about how your customers and you were engaging and continue to engage using new models and new technologies. But Tiger, as you look to build Genpact through the next decade, right, next 5 years, 10 years, there's no doubt that the world will, settle to a new normal of some sort, right? But in the UK right now, you had a reopening, COVID cases up, but mercifully hospitalization still down. A lot of continental Europe getting very nervous with spurts here and there. US, we're seeing things happening. So this volatility and the unfortunate public health scares will keep coming and going. And Australia has gone into lockdown. I mean, all kinds of things going on. So 2 questions for you to conclude the conversation today, right? So one is, in the short term, how do we keep going in the context of serving the capital markets, serving the shareholders on the one hand, and balancing that with the requirements of employee health? You spoke eloquently about that, and also customer delight, to pick up what Puneet said. And I think there's a little bit of a balancing act there, because but the longer term perspective, right? If you look 5-7 years down the line, I'm not going to ask you to make technology predictions. That would be a very foolish thing to do from my part. But from a business model perspective, right? How do you see the evolution happening? What's the journey looking like? Over to you, sir.
So Jaideep, it's a great question because, and I'm glad you said don't make a technology prediction, because I actually have had a fundamental view about business and change for about 25 years, which is, I think people spend too much time predicting what's going to happen versus what actually people should spend time on is, if something were to happen, how do you react? And how do you react faster? Number one. And 2, how do you know something is going to happen tomorrow morning, one day before someone else? So you can then react. And then how do you make that reaction independent of size and scale? Which means you react like a day one company, irrespective of how big you are. And I've always said that if you can build that into the cultural DNA of a company and a business and a team and a leader, you are there for a long time. Volatility, I know we talk volatility in the context of the pandemic. Actually, the word volatility, VUCA, volatile, uncertain, I've even forgotten what CA stood for, ambiguous, whatever, chaotic, or whatever, some phrase like that. I'm sure it was a McKinsey term, VUCA. That got coined during the global financial crisis. And I've always said that the world we are in is going to be volatile forever. And what that means is, actually, Jaideep, we don't think about balancing stakeholders. We think about serving all stakeholders at the same time. More and more, I think we're going to find that when you serve one stakeholder, the chances are it flows into the other stakeholder and the other stakeholder. So there's a connection. So therefore, doing good to climate and sustainability is not because it's the right thing to do alone. It's because actually you'll make more money and reward your shareholders in the long term. It's actually because employees will get attracted to work in your organization if you stand for sustainability and those practices and diversity and inclusion and so on. So we think a lot about all 4 stakeholders, investors, customers, employees, and community are interconnected. And any change in one is going to change the other. So the volatility is a given. So therefore, you're going to build an organization that is agile, flexible, picks up signals and processes it.
Let me tell you, before I hand over to you, Puneet, I was interviewing a very prominent venture capitalist who's invested in a bunch of consumer companies. And he said to me, Jaideep, climate change is the single biggest threat to my business model. So I looked at him quizzically. I said, what do you mean? He said, climate change is the single biggest threat to human consumption patterns, to how we live, to how much we are able to spend, and therefore to my business. So I said, well, that's an interesting. The moment you explain it that way, there's a clear line of sight, right? And I think you're seeing that in the same context in Genpact as well. Puneet, last word to you.
No, I agree with Tiger, right? We should not make predictions, especially about the future. So we should not go there. But I think one thing I can say with some level of confidence, right, just from my vantage point, is technologies will become much more simpler and will get democratized a lot more in the coming years, right? And Genpact and AWS are terrific examples of businesses which are exactly trying to do the same thing. I'll give you an example. AI/ML, right? Used to be rocket science. It's not rocket science anymore. There are really small companies in India. More retail, for example, is using that to figure out what tomatoes to sell. And so it's getting democratized. It's getting simpler. And for example, in AI/ML, our mission is to put AI/ML in the hands of every developer. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to use AI/ML, right? And I'll give you another example. The algorithms that we use at Amazon.com to do fraud detection and do recommendations are now available plug and play for any retailer to use. It's no longer a secret sauce, so you don't need to build that from the scratch. And that to me is a real unlock, right? So if there's one thing I can say about the future is technology will become much simpler, much easier to use, and it'll get democratized much more, driven by exactly what Genpact and companies like AWS are trying to do.
I'll tell you what, this is me as an Amazon customer. Everybody has access to the technology, but somehow the Amazon app just works better. So please pass that on to your colleagues on the retail side. It is a statement of fact from me as a consumer. I say that in a completely neutral way. Gentlemen, we are flat out of time. What a fascinating conversation it's been. No doubt that we've lived through a couple of very challenging years. And I guess I dare say, learned a lot in the last couple of years as we've tried to look after our teams, look after the interests of various stakeholders and so on. And I suspect the next few quarters is going to be, dare I say, equally interesting to put a positive spin on it. And I think, I'm sure you'll agree with me that we all hope that the COVID wave will not come back, third, fourth, fifth, whatever wave it is. And everyone viewing, guys, please get vaccinated, because there's now, if we are living in a world of machine learning and intelligence, it is absolutely irrefutable that folks who are vaccinated will get ill less often and will have less severe illness than those who are not. So if you take nothing else from this today, in the age of machine learning, take that away. Tiger Tyagarajan, Puneet Chandok, it's been a fascinating conversation. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tiger. And I agree with your message, right? Go vaccinate, get vaccinated, folks, and take care of yourself.
Right. Thank you.